Hello and good morning everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jack Newman. I'm the Sales and Partner Manager for Nétive here in the UK. We are a vendor management system. We're a Dutch organisation. We've got local teams in the UK, Netherlands, Belgium and Germany. We are of course a trusted partner of APSCo OutSource. And they've given us the opportunity today to deliver this webinar to you. And so firstly, I want to thank everybody involved from APSCo OutSourced and their community for their work in coordinating the session. But in today's session, I will be joined by a really great panel. We will be talking about the inclusive workforce and how we can enable diversity, equity and inclusion in the staffing industry. So look, I'm not here to tell you the story of how we got here. This session will not be a walkthrough of history, but more of a discussion on where we are today, some of the challenges faced in moving forward, the reasons why businesses should care, what progress has been made, and actually what progress needs to be made to close the gap. As always during these webinars, we invite you to share your comments, your questions, ideas, your challenges through the chat functionality. We'll try to raise them to the panel, or shall I say, in fact, Mel Forbes, no less, will raise those questions to the panel. Mel, of course, requires very little introduction. Sorry for that, Mel. But you can follow up after the session by email if you've got any other questions that we don't address. So we'll share some contact details at the end. So look, as we all know, in the staffing, the recruitment market, but also much more widely in society, diversity and inclusion, essentially fairness, continues to be a really frequent topic of discussion. And we've discussed the need for this to be wholesale for years. And actually, I think finally businesses themselves have recognised the really strong business case for improving the level of diversity and inclusion within their workforce. And the data really shows that there has been progress when it comes to improving diversity and inclusion in the workplace. But as we know, there's still a really long way to go. And I think it's really important that we understand it's much more than just policies, programs, headcounts. I think we need to recognise that employers that do really embrace this, they will outpace their competitors. They'll respect the needs of their people and the potential of those people. And we already know, fact, a diverse mix of people leads to a diversity in thinking. And 3/4 of organisations would agree with that. And some of the data, I think we all know this is not a sales pitch on why DE&I is something you should care about, but I think it's important that we look at some of the data and link that back to your business case. McKinsey, for example, and almost all of the other research, it shows that it makes your organisation more effective, it makes them more successful, it makes you more profitable. Josh Burson says that inclusive companies are 1.7 times more likely to be innovative. He would say they get 2.3 times more cash flow per employee. So the fact is it can enhance creativity and innovation. It empowers your teams to make better decisions. And if we think about this from a talent lens, it increases your ability to recruit a really diverse talent pool. So actually extend an organization's capacity to access talent. And that's something that we're going to come back to. And if we obviously consider as well the impact to the person, loads of good research from a great place to work, and it indicates that inclusive organizations mean that the person is 10 times more likely to look forward to going to work. They're 6 times more likely to take pride in their work. They're 5 times more likely to stay a long time at their company. So that concept of employee retention is really deeply ingrained in all of this. So the data shows really, really clearly that companies with ethnically, culturally and gender diverse teams are more likely to outperform those that don't. So we know there's a tangible benefit. It's obvious, it's crystal clear, and the benefits reach the organisation, the people and wider society in the global economy. So I'm actually going to kick off and bring on some of the guests, because I'd hate to leave them waiting around for me to stop talking, because to be fair, they could be waiting a while. So I'll introduce them on for a bit of a chat. I'm going to start with Narada Bouwland. Narada, could you please give our viewers a very quick introduction, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Narada. I'm a former colleague of Jack, so we know each other quite well. So good to see you, Jack, today.
Likewise.
So my background is in technology. So I've worked for Nétive VMS for about 5 years, and currently I'm a marketing entrepreneur. And I think, Jack, you invited me for this session because, diversity and inclusion is probably the story of my life from different perspectives. So I'm very happy to join the session today and to share my thoughts on this. Brilliant.
Thanks, Narada, and appreciate you joining us. And you're absolutely right. It's to kind of gain some of your experiences, some of those perspectives as well. So yeah, thank you for joining. Next up is Mark Jones. Mark, good morning. Please also, if you could introduce yourself to our viewers.
Perfect. Thanks, Jack. Good morning. Yeah, so Mark Jones. I am the Senior Manager for ED&I across UK and Europe for Randstad and Randstad Sourceright. I live in Cardiff. I'm looking at Cardiff now. I'm in my back bedroom. So yeah, I live in Cardiff with my wife, 2 kids who are in school, thankfully. And I'm very excited to be here. I've got a background in both recruitment and inclusion. So, yeah,
very good. And Mark, thank you so much again for joining. Similarly to Narada, right, we bring you guys in so that we can start to understand some of your perspectives, some of your experience. And I think, Mark, your role and kind of focus, I'm really interested to kind of learn more about some of that during the session. And last but absolutely not least is Liz Johnson. And actually, I'm going to kick off Liz's introduction for a very good reason. Liz is a 3-time Paralympic medalist. She won gold in Beijing. She was also world and European champion. So I think that is worth a little round of applause, even if it's just from me, Liz. Liz, please introduce yourself to the group.
We've done it. No, but on a serious note, like that was, I think, like my one life, like I sort of retired at 30 from swimming and then sort of had another career as well. So typically I would be just down the road from Mark in Newport in South Wales as well, but I'm in London today. So once I finished swimming, what swimming did for me was it gave me access into a world where it wasn't inclusive at the start. It wasn't equitable at the start. Nobody knew what the Paralympics was when I was starting out. But through the years, through the 20 years of my existence and my participation and competitiveness within sport, it changed, the landscape changed, and people understood diversity and difference a lot better. So then when I retired from swimming, I wanted to make sure that the rest of society got those opportunities as well, because there seems to be a distinct disconnect between what we see in that environment and what we learn and what we admire in that environment, and then how we implement that into the world. So in my current life, I don't swim anymore, maybe twice a week if I'm lucky. I am a co-founder and managing director of an organization called the Ability People, which is primarily, well, it is staffed entirely by people with disabilities and impairments, but what we try to be is the personification of what organizations should become, because we removed all the unnecessary barriers that existed to enable people to work. And so naturally we ended up with a very diverse team, but without having a diversity policy, because we didn't need it, because we were just getting the best people and enabling them to do the roles that they were qualified to do. So that's one of the big things I do. And the other big thing that I do is I'm an executive producer at Whisper TV for the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games. So, but again, I've got a huge lens on inclusion and ensuring that the tone of the games is right to appeal to the audiences that are hopefully going to watch it.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you, Liz. I really appreciate you joining. I promise this isn't my job interview to host anything on BBC, so don't worry. I'm not coming for anyone's job. You mentioned that there's kind of, you've had the one life as an elite athlete and kind of another life now that you move into kind of with much more laser focused on diversity, equity and inclusion. Your work in disability inclusion has had you recognised as one of the BBC's 100 women. That's a second round of applause from me and from the group. Just tell us a little bit, Liz, about some of the interactions that you have with organisations. What are some of the problems that they come to you with and look for support in?
I think the interactions start from a place of goodwill and good intention, because we all know that in 2023, regardless of what demographic we're talking about, difference shouldn't be a barrier, right? So people come with the best intention, but I think one of the biggest barriers is that people don't prioritise it. They still see it as the right thing to do, or we'll do it if we've got budget left, or we'll do it if we've got time. And whenever anybody's trying to streamline something, that's the first thing that goes, because again, but I think it's due to a lack of understanding. So a lot of the time people come to us to become more comfortable with difference and have an increased exposure to people who are different to them, because I think that's the biggest misconception, is that we are led by what we read or what we see in the media, and so, or we listen to somebody speak on their viewpoint and we think everybody from that demographic there needs that support or has that experience. And again, that's the same across the whole of society, not just for disabled people. So we very much, where we provide the support is in all different areas. So whether that's looking at recruitment processes and helping support there, looking at environment, just generally helping people choose the right language or understand what they should and shouldn't do. And again, not in a, I think historically with difference and with diversity, people are very worried about doing the wrong thing. And so rather than embrace it and learn from it, they do nothing. And actually pretend it's not happening. But then what happens is people who are different, whether that's through gender, race, sexual orientation, age, or disability, they carry the burden then, because they're the people that miss out. So I think our primary focus is really about let's not talk about what the issues are, like you said in your intro, Jack, but like what are the solutions and how do we move forward?
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm going to kick off with some more kind of questions now, and we'll start with one that hopefully is a simple one. What does it mean, this is to the group, for an organisation to be truly diverse and inclusive? Narada, maybe I'll start with you. You've got to find the unmute button, Narada.
Here we go.
It's 2021.
Here I am. Yeah, still getting used to it. Thanks. Now, I think what you and Liz are saying is that you see that there are some organizations that see that they need to develop in this area, right? And in my personal experience, a lot of organizations are not even there yet. And I think that has to do with there not being an actual sense of urgency on the topic, which can happen, right? Maybe if you are doing well economically, which is basically the idea of a business. If you are doing well recruitment-wise, bridging towards staffing, and there's no urgency also on that part, then it just might be that this is not a topic that is really of any urgency for your organization, unless it's connected to the purpose of the organization or to the values of the organization, and then it becomes more relevant. But maybe it's my Dutch perspective because I'm based in the Netherlands, but I think for the majority of organizations in the Netherlands currently, the sense of urgency or the defining your purpose or values in that manner is still something that is in development. So that's why I personally always choose to see what organizations or what people are, let's say, in their maturity ready to have this discussion at all. Because if it's not relevant to you, then it might be a waste of all our time.
Yeah, and I think relevance is obviously always really important, and you've raised something I think really important there, that it's about linking it back to the organizational objectives and driving that sense of urgency. Mark, in your kind of experience then, how do you help organizations tie this, let's say it's a hope and a wish, we want to be a more diverse and inclusive organization. How do you start to link that to their organizational objectives?
I'm sure we'll come to talk about the all the good stuff that large corporates talk about of employee value proposition and brand value proposition, and making sure that those two things are aligned. And what that comes down to for us as humans who have to actually work somewhere and be somewhere 8 to 9 hours a day broadly is it a good place to work? Is it a good place to work for me? And that brand value proposition, that from a talent and attraction perspective of why folk join a company, is sometimes really polished. It's very, very smart, very cutting edge. And if anyone looks at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see some of the firms I've worked for in terms of like FTSE leading firms. So it is that polished piece. Actually, that those people have to work somewhere, and the culture, as Narada has alluded to there, prevails through that. And it's ironically, coming from me working for Randstad, not just about talent attraction. It is more about the culture, the talent retention, the promotion, the equity of opportunity. And I choose that word really carefully, the equity of specifically crafted opportunity for each individual, which when there's 16,000 of you working in an organization, it's difficult to do, but really important to do, to make people feel seen, heard, respected, and part of that culture, because they are that culture. They create the culture. So it's very, very important that, going back to the corporate speak, that the brand value proposition meets the employee value proposition, the attraction piece meets the lived experience.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And you raise a good point, Mark, which is that, look, there has been a lot of progress, and I don't think there's anybody out there who still thinks workforce diversity is a bad thing. Like, I'd be really, really surprised. So, we're talking about it, we've been talking about it. Why, for some, is it still a challenge? Open question.
I think I don't mind to go first. I think, like Mark said, it's about the equity of opportunity for all individuals, but people still don't understand what that is, because we still live in a world where there's a huge amount of ableism that exists, and this idea that there's a best way to do something. But similarly, people then don't show their vulnerability by asking a question of, is there a better way for you? Like if they're met with someone who's not like them, typically they would shy away from asking what they perceive to be a difficult question, but sometimes it's a necessary question to see if that person has everything that they need to be successful. And I think so, like the reason we haven't, because again, we've made progress. Progress is great, right? But I'll probably say this about 50 times in the next half an hour, but it's 2023. We have enough information out there to know that difference is not bad, and difference it's not a negative, and it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength. And I think there's difference between the way people talk about that and try and represent that within their organization, but actually how people live it. And so for me, it's about the fact that people don't understand the barriers of people who are not like them because they've never needed to. But instead of seeing that as okay, they see it as a weakness that they're not ready to admit, because they feel like they should know this stuff. But our argument at the Ability People is always like, well, how should you know that if you've never needed to know it before? And actually what we always try to do is relate it back to a context that they're going to understand. Like if you go into it, or if you start a new company, or you're visiting a client and you need the toilet and you don't know where it is, what do? You ask. And so why is it that we don't ask? It's because we're perceived that we should know this stuff, but that goes back to this idea that there's a hierarchy. And I think for me, that's the biggest barrier, in that we need to help people become more comfortable with not being perfect.
Yeah, it's about being comfortable in being uncomfortable, right? It's having difficult conversations, and doing so in a way that, again, drives this notion of diversity and inclusion, right? Like freedom of thought and wealth and diversity of thought across different groups of people.
Yeah. I'd like to add something to that, Jack, to your initial question, why it's still a challenge. I think from a racism perspective, that's I think that the polarization is actually working against the cause of diversity and inclusion, because right now, if you would speak up about the fact that you would like a more diverse workforce, then you have the risk of being profiled as being too woke. Or if you are somewhat skeptical about a diversity goal that you might have as an organization, then you are immediately put in the basket with extreme conservatism, right? So that makes the discussion really difficult to have, because actually the majority of the people live in the middle, right? And if we talk about this issue from the middle perspective, then probably quite quickly you would agree on a lot of stuff around this subject. But I think it's challenging for a person to speak out, to speak up about it, because you run the risk of being, typecast in a role that you do not want. And secondly, what I think, or what I have experienced in my business career so far, is that we are all quite equipped talking about our skills, right, or your personality traits, and how you are different from me from a professional perspective. So that's already a personal conversation, and that's something that everybody's quite used to. Only now, when you pull in diversity and inclusion into the equation, so that means your race, your sexual orientation, to the extent you are able or not, that makes the discussion about how we work together go into the personal space outside of work. So who you are as an individual outside of work, regardless of your skill. So that's another personal layer that makes that I think is the reason why this conversation is difficult for a lot of people. So that's why I like what you said, Jack. This difficult conversation, or this awkward conversation, that's a type of conversation that I have had quite a lot. I'm looking for that type of conversation, and I challenge everybody that I speak about this to, let's acknowledge that it's kind of awkward. Then, despite of that, have the conversation and see how we can move forward. And I think that is a skill that we need to learn while we develop around this topic.
Yeah, I think it links back to what Liz just mentioned, which is that there's like a wealth of education and training that we as people globally need in order to have those conversations, right? So, and I think everybody, as we've said, recognizes that this is something that needs to be fixed and that we need to, as an economy, make right. But there's still conflicting views on the actual execution of it. And I think that's typically where a lot of these programs fall over, right? Is, my belief is that execution will always trump strategy, right? Doesn't matter if you have the best strategy in the world, if you don't execute on it, you might well not have bothered. So when we think about that, Mark, in terms of like how you take this from strategy to execution, at that execution phase, who should this sort of program sit within an organization? Is it senior leadership? Is it HR? Is it marketing? Where do they start? Yeah,
good question, and a really easy cop-out, which I will go into more detail on, is everyone. Because, I work in recruitment, but previously being an in-house inclusion partner, I looked at a full employee life cycle. So the ball quite often gets thrown over the fence to the recruiters to fix the diversity problem, the characteristic problem, right? Of we need to hire more women, or we need to hire more black people, whatever it may be. But actually, it comes back to that brand value proposition, employee value proposition piece. So you can hire as many people of different characteristics as you want, but if you're not creating the environment through their everyday lives that they stick in your company, that they feel valued, that they're getting promoted, that they have an environment or a company that cares about them and values them, they're not going to stick. And then from our perspective as a recruitment partner, we're back to square one, trying to find rarefied talent in a rarefied talent market. And I know we're going to come on to talk about different talent attraction strategies and recruitment methodologies and stuff like that. But it's everyone. And I think, Liz, to your point, Narada, the talking about, how everyone needs to be on the same page from a cultural perspective. We talk about privilege, right? And privilege as a bad thing. And in sort of, we do anti-racism training internally, and we do inclusive leadership. And for me, when I'm delivering those sessions, it's about empowering our people to empathize. Of, look, I can never know what it's like to be black. I can never know what it's like to be gay, for example. But I can know what it was like to change from not being a parent to being a parent. So I need to take that empathy and that lived experience and understand what that means for my privilege, and then start overlaying that onto different people. I'm not saying that everything is the same, crikey, absolutely not the same experience, but understand where things get dialed down and up. And then what we find from a cultural perspective internally and with some of our clients, that we're able to start building folks' empathy to understand why these things are important, so that we're able to sort of curve those conversations that Narada alluded to, away from the why are we still doing this to, well, just think of it from your perspective and how X, Y, and Z have affected you and what that felt like to you, and then translate to what that could feel like internally.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And look, there's a lot of interesting points to raise. And one of the things that you raised a couple of moments ago, Liz, was actually something around the barriers and the barriers to entry. So I'm just going to deviate slightly, and it'd be good to kind of understand from you what some of those barriers are. Let's take, disabled people entering the workforce. If we were to go way back, Liz, right, to the first time you jumped in a pool, would you have been profiled and perceived as a possible gold medalist swimmer?
In short, absolutely not. I think the one thing about minority groups is there's not as many of them, right, to plot success. So typically, the bigger the pool of people, you can sort of gauge that person has this size feet at this age, is this height, could potentially, like, if you follow that curve, the chances are they'll end up going that time, right? Like in a easy sporting sense. And similarly with recruitment, I think because there is so much pressure on recruiters to fill the gaps from their clients, like, then with all the best will in the world, as the guys alluded to earlier, people push it onto them and go find us more diverse talent. But actually, for that to happen, you have to have a more diverse process that I'm feeding them into. And so a lot of the barriers that exist, nobody's really aware of because they don't experience them. And I think to build on Mark's point is, yes, there's a level of transferable empathy that can happen. But actually, when it comes down to it, when we're looking at recruitment processes, the easiest way to explain the barriers that still exist for many groups, particularly disabled people, is imagine that the only thing stopping you getting that role, or was determining whether you could go left or right, was the month that you were born in, because you cannot control that, right? Like, you can't change it, but it massively impacts whether you're going to be successful or not. And that when we're talking about recruitment processes, that's how we need to think about it, because actually at the moment they are designed in a way that you have to 99 times out of 100 be able to present yourself in a certain way at a certain time to a certain person. And we are like we've talked about it before, but we are trying to retrain the brain of everybody else, because we've been taught that make good eye contact, sit up straight, open your body, use words that demonstrate your knowledge. But actually a lot of people can't present themselves in that way for whatever reason, right? But it's about allowing the recruiters to have the freedom and training them and helping them understand that there's more than one way to establish what is possible. But then it's got to be a collective approach, because you cannot say find us more diverse talent or make sure that there is at least one female on the shortlist, one person of color. You can't do that, because actually what we should have is a recruitment process that is equitable in the sense that people can present themselves however best they feel most comfortable. And as a recruiter or a panel at the interview, we're establishing if that person has the skills that we need to fit into our team. And when we say fit into our team, we don't mean like the same food or support the same football team or go on have the same idea of social activity. We mean we've got a gap in our team that we need to fill with a person who has the same mindset for success as we do. That's what we're looking for. And so with for one thing is one of the biggest barriers is actually when we have dedicated, and this sounds controversial, but hear me out, when we have dedicated programs for specific groups in society, right? It is often absolutely necessary, because unfortunately we still live in a world where people don't get it, and actually a lot of minority demographics have to prove themselves before they're given the same opportunity as everybody else, right? Like that's the reality. So back to swimming for a second. I swam, but my mum very carefully picked my swimming lessons so that I had the experience that was best for me. And I went to a swimming club initially specifically for people with disabilities, because they had the right amount of time and knowledge to help me. But I moved into a mainstream swimming club because I needed more access to pool time. I needed more intense training. I needed all the other support that went with that. But for years and years and years, I was in the bottom lane with 10-year-olds, even when I was 14, 15, because what determined whether you could go up into the other lanes was how quick you were. Well, I was swimming with half a body, so I was never going to be as fast as my peers who didn't have my disability that were my age. But in doing so, I was never going to be able to reach my potential, because by moving up the lanes, you accessed more support or more training or more like the nutritional elements or the physio or the gym and all of those things, right? So that barrier was not my fault. That barrier was not anything I could do anything about. So I could, and this goes back to Narada's point, is a lot of the time, someone who is different is just so grateful that like they've had the opportunity that they don't want to rock the boat, because they don't want people to think that they're moaning, or actually sometimes you don't even want people to notice that you've slipped through the net than you're there. So I think it's really important that when we're looking at recruitment process, we start with the process and we go right back to the beginning, and we look at why is this here? Why is this stage necessary? What are we trying to establish? What is the objective? And then is there another way that somebody can prove that they have that capability? And I think the message that I would say to everybody is, okay, it seems like a huge task, and it seems like it's going to be really expensive, and it seems like it's going to take forever, but it won't. If you get the right people to help you and support you, it won't. But also, something I always used to say is sport, short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain. Like we can keep doing what we're doing, and you'll keep getting the same people, and you'll be talking about diversity, and you'll be talking about inclusion, but actually you won't have an authentic environment where people can be the best versions of themselves. You might have people that have been placed. And I think that's the important thing. We talk about diversity all the time, but if we get inclusion and equity right, diversity is a byproduct of that. And that's what we want, because it's only then that an organization benefits from the diversity that's in the room or around the table. If the diversity was your main aim, well, that's easy. You can go out in the street and you can pick out 10 different people who look different or have different life experience, and you can put them in a room. But it doesn't mean that they're the right people to make your business more successful. And I think I feel like I'm ranting, but I'm not. I promise I'm rounding this out now. But the reality is that that's where we've gone wrong in the past, because we think that to fix diversity or to create diversity, that's what we need to do. But all that does is compound the stereotypes that these people are not right, or shouldn't be here, or not right. And it's probably right, because if you pick me to do a job just on the basis that I was a female and I have a disability, there's a lot I'd be rubbish at. Does that make sense? So I think it's important that we look at the how, like how can we create inclusion, and what are we doing to make sure that it's authentic? Rant over. Carry on, as you were.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that, Jack, if you don't mind, because I think that's at least a trend in the Netherlands currently. Is there are lots of research is being done on looking at a person based on his skills, right? So I think we're in the staffing industry, we're also transitioning to that. Looking further than somebody's resume, but looking at the person's skills. But our processes and the way we work with our clients is still pretty much based on a resume and an interview. Still today, right? And that interview part is something that Liz alluded to. If you do well in interviews, does it make you more competent to do a certain job? So I completely agree with that. So I think in a couple of years that we will have made some steps toward more skill-based hiring, in which assessment for a certain skill is far more important than somebody's resume, his educational background, or his past work experience, right? If you are an analytical guy that is really well equipped to work with numbers, for example, you just are probably successful in a certain job type. And if you can look at a person based on that, that will already help. That's not the solution to the end goal of complete inclusion, but at least it helps create a more fair recruitment process.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Narada. It was something I was planning to kind of come on to, is we've spoken about this kind of talent skills shortage piece and this priority for organizations for years. It's not new. So attracting, retaining, the best talent is high on everyone's agenda. And I think there's a perfect storm brewing here, and just bear with me a couple of minutes. The storm is there is a much more global economy now than yesterday. It's really, really competitive out there. If you look at the recruitment market, anyone will tell you it's tough. For the first time ever, we've got like 5 generations in the workforce. So the mix of people that make up our workforce is very different. How they expect to be treated is different. How they expect to engage with an employer is different. You've got this evolving nature of skills demand that Narada just mentioned, and actually being able to understand the skills that are required by the workforce continues to shift. We've then also got the socio-economic climate as well. And actually all of those different things that are realized by this massive market threat, this skills and talent shortage. And all of this leads itself, from my perspective, perfectly to looking at DE&I as a solution, right? And a competitive advantage, not just doing it to meet legislative or corporate policy, but actually making sure that you give yourself the opportunity to access the very best talent. So I think that diversity and inclusion is a way of solving skills shortages to be able to do that effectively. And Narada, your point, skills-based hiring is actually a way to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? If you can actually do that in quite an organic way. You're focusing on selecting people based on skills, competencies, characteristics, traits, not their job title or whether they have a degree or what school that they went to. So that's really interesting. I think that because you're determining people based on their skills, you're removing bias in the chain, right? And I think that's something, Mark, we spoke about this before, the concept of removing bias in the recruitment process. There's a long way to go on that, but if we were to focus on skills, then surely that naturally takes us some of the way there. And again, the research just says that if you hire for skills, it's 5 times more predictive of job performance than hiring based on somebody's education. Again, it's just a fact. So I think it seems like quite a logical thing that we need to consider, because these are all really quite closely intertwined. We're getting close just towards the end of the session. I could sit here and talk to you guys all day about this stuff, and trust me, I could. But I'm just going to maybe check, Mel, if we have any questions that have come in from the viewers.
Not so far. I think, yeah, if I open that up now, if anybody's got a question they want to ask, they want to pop it in the chat, we can pick it up. Over to you. We'll
just wait on that, Mel, and see if there is anything that comes in. Just quickly, I'm going to pose one more question to the panel. If you have 20 seconds to answer it. If you were to give the global organizations one big, hairy, audacious goal to achieve when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what would it be? Narada, I'll pick on you first.
Yeah, I would definitely go for something that is feasible. That's just how my brain works. So I still think you should take it one step at a time. And the first thing that you should develop is being able to have this conversation. And I actually have a follow-up question for Mark in a minute, because having this conversation, if somebody would ask me, then I'm quite equipped to express myself what I think is needed if I would work in an organization to be more diverse. But I had a discussion recently with somebody that not everybody that is from a minority is ready to have that conversation, because probably, as Liz said once before, that person from that minority is happy to be there, to have accomplished a career within an organization. So, with a more negatively loaded word, has been assimilated in the dominant culture. So that might not be a good, a good spokesperson for the entire group. But my question for Mark is it at all? Do you think, from a corporate perspective, you should, let's say, pre-create an environment for a person from a minority to be, to feel safe or to be successful, or should you be more aware of what the current needs of your workforce are, and then develop it from that perspective?
Gosh, answer both good questions very quickly. I don't do anything quickly. I hate saying we create a culture. I think a culture, and hopefully this answers your question, a culture creates itself and grows. And I think putting people that want to talk about themselves facilitates that culture. So if people want to come forward and do it, that facilitates them. I think driving it, and my 20-second advice is to leaders in big organizations, understand what performative means, because if all the stuff you're doing is performative, it doesn't create that culture that gives folk safety to do what you've suggested there, Narada.
Liz, over to you. Narada's eaten up 84 seconds of your time.
Don't worry. Well, I only had 20, so I'm minus 64. Anyways, I think the big goal is, like, to Narada's point, it is small steps, but I think the goal should be completion. The goal should be pure, like, full equity. And I think to do that, we need to stop accepting reasonable adjustments and accommodations as the answer, because they're not. Like, because nobody knows who determines what's reasonable. And also, back to your point, Jack, about legislation is typically the bare minimum that needs to be done. It does not empower and enable people to be successful. So I think for me, the goal is that it's realistic, but it's relative as well. And we just keep moving forward in that. So continually look at and educate and ask the question of the barriers that are existing. And you won't be able to get rid of them all straight away, but don't just do one thing or speak about it once, or have one day or 1 month or 1 week where you focus on something and then think you've met your target for the next 3 years. Like, let's make it continuous, and just keep asking yourself, how would I feel if I couldn't access this opportunity because my birthday's in January, not March? And that is always a good place to start.
Really eloquently put, Liz. Liz, just a quick question. What was your gold medal time in Beijing?
So I had an injured shoulder and my mum died 10 days before my race. So I won in 1:41.87, but at the time my world record was 1:40.09.
Amazing.
So I didn't do the best I could, but it was enough on the day.
It was enough on the day for sure. And what we're going to do is see if I can wrap up within Liz's finish time, because I'm just conscious of everyone else's time. So I'll start the clock. Just some thoughts from me, right? We've spoken about the benefits of all of this, and it's obvious, it's crystal clear, so we don't need to cover that too much more. But I think we've spoken about some of the challenges that businesses have in actually implementing and executing these sorts of strategies. So I think it's about understanding who's going to own it. Where is this going to sit within the business? We've spoken today about it sitting everywhere, but it's about being able to identify what are you trying to achieve, what are the gaps that you have currently. It's around listening to these people as well. And, you know, good design is important, but good implementation is vital, and it's execution over strategy every single time. We spoke a little bit about diversity and inclusion and the skills kind of shortage. And I truly believe that skills-based hiring is a mechanism that we need to look at and needs to be leveraged to help us achieve diversity and inclusion, and to do that really quite organically. There is a guy called Adam Hawkins. He works for LinkedIn. Check him out because A, he's quite cool. B, you can learn a lot from him. And C, he actually shares that opinion that, you know, the global workforce really needs to make that shift towards skills-based recruitment, and very quickly. So I fear that I'm running out of time. I think Liz is coming up to the finish line now. So there's a saying that nothing worth achieving comes easily. So it's very true. And I think the benefits of workplace diversity are so obviously attractive that the inherent challenges within it have to be addressed. So brings us to the end of the session. We want to hear from you. Do you have challenges like this in your personal life, in your program, in your business? Are you struggling to move from strategy to execution? If you've got questions, you'd like to understand how we can support you, then please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me directly, jack.newman@native.co.uk. We will share contact details for our panelists after the session as well. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. Again, thank you all for joining us today. We hope the session was useful. I'd like to again thank the APSCo OutSource community for hosting us, and thank you to our panel, Liz Johnson, Mark Jones and Narada Bouwland. Until next time, thanks very much.